welcome to The Nation. I'm Melissa Ong. Today we're honoured to speak to Ambassador Edgar D. Kagan, the Distinguished Ambassador of the United States to Malaysia. With a rich history dating back to the 1800s, Malaysia and the United States have forged a resilient partnership across various domains. As we delve into the intricacies of this relationship, Ambassador Kagan will shed light on his vision for enhancing cooperation between our two nations. Your Excellency, congratulations and welcome to the show. Well, I'd like to start with this, Ambassador Kagan. Could you share, your initial reflections on the depths and the state of the bilateral relationship between both our countries, Malaysia and also the United States?
Thank you so much, Melissa, and it's such a pleasure to be here with you. I'm very grateful for the opportunity, but also very honored for the charge that's been given to me to represent the United States in Malaysia. It is great to be back. As I think you and I were discussing, my family and I were here for 3 years, from 2014 to 2017. We loved it here. We had a really, really good time. It was wonderful for our children, and we have incredibly fond memories of experiences throughout Malaysia. So getting the opportunity to come back was really a great pleasure for us. I think it's important, as you said, to recognize this is a relationship that goes back many, many years. Americans first started coming to the region to trade in the 18th century. The U.S. was one of the first countries to recognize Malaysia. The day Malaysia declared its independence, the U.S. recognized Malaysia as a sovereign state, and we've had a very close partnership ever since. It was over 75 years ago the U.S. established a diplomatic presence in Kuala Lumpur, and over 100 years ago that we established our first formal diplomatic presence in Malaysia. And I think that it reflects the fact that there's such strong ties between our peoples. And these are economic ties. As you know, U.S. companies are major investors in Malaysia and that have brought prosperity to Americans and to Malaysians. There's been over 150 billion ringgit of an FDI announced since 2021. And in 2022, the last year for which there's accurate data available from the Malaysian Department of Statistics, the U.S. was the largest single investor, outside investor in Malaysia, and brought in the most outside investment in that year. We've also had strong security ties, promoting a free and open Indo-Pacific, and something where the U.S. has stood with the people of Malaysia in the past. And we also have very strong people-to-people ties. I'm incredibly proud of the number of Americans who've lived in Malaysia and who visited Malaysia, also the number of Malaysians who've come to the United States. I think those ties are incredibly powerful, and that's something that we look to try and expand in coming years. And then lastly, and I think it's important to acknowledge that there are challenges, and one of them is that there's deep unhappiness in Malaysia over what is happening in Gaza. I think the U.S., we understand that. We have heard very carefully the words of our Malaysian counterparts and friends, both publicly and privately, as well as officially through diplomatic channels. And I think it's important to recognize that we agree on a lot of things. One is the importance of surging humanitarian assistance to the people of Gaza. Also working to get an immediate but sustained ceasefire that includes the release of hostages. And then in the long term, moving towards a two-state solution. And the U.S. is committed to this, and I think that this is an area where we may disagree on the mechanics of it and the way that it's being done, but I think that we share the concerns that Malaysians have over the suffering in Gaza, and also we recognize that what people are looking for is not words. They're looking for actions that bring about a surge in humanitarian assistance, a sustained ceasefire, and also a restoration of a serious process leading to a two-state solution.
Thank you, Ambassador, for bringing such wisdom and empathy at the start of this show. Ambassador, amidst the evolving geopolitical landscape, how do you perceive the significance of Malaysia in advancing regional stability, like you mentioned earlier, and cooperation particularly in Southeast Asia, and also particularly in the context of your diplomatic engagement here in Malaysia?
Melissa, that's a great question. And I think I'd make a couple of points. The first is, Malaysia has always been a country which has great influence in the region. And I think that's because of Malaysia's track record as a country that is committed to ASEAN, as one of the founding members, a country that is committed to peace and security in the region, and also as a country that is committed to an open economy that leads to an economy focused on trade that leads to prosperity for its citizens, but also greater economic engagement across the region. So we see Malaysia as a very important partner. We're about to celebrate the 10th anniversary of our comprehensive partnership. I think that more importantly, we have been working together on issues of peace and security in the region, going back to the very first day of Malaysia's independence. We've been working together to try and promote prosperity together, both bilaterally in each of our countries, but also through promoting policies which we think will promote development and economic growth in the region. And we see Malaysia's continuing influence as well as its role in ASEAN and its role next year as chair of ASEAN as opportunities for us to both do more.
Drawing from your experience, how do you, or what strategic areas do you foresee that hold the greatest opportunity to further strengthening the comprehensive partnership between Malaysia and also United States?
I think there's a number of them. I think one is we have to keep working together to support rules and norms in the region and support peace and stability. And I think part of that means adhering to international law, working together to promote respect for sovereignty, and also ensuring that disputes are resolved peacefully. And that's something that Malaysia has long been committed to. And I think that that's an area where we appreciate our partnership and the ability to work together. I think there's also opportunities in areas dealing with the climate crisis. I think both the United States and Malaysia are acutely aware of the challenge that climate change poses to ourselves, but also the opportunity it presents, not just for each of our countries in economic terms, but the opportunity to further strengthen regional cooperation. So that's something that we'd like to work with Malaysia on, and I think that we feel that we have strong partners. We respect the leadership that the government has shown, and we think that there's much more that we can do.
You know, one of the areas that we have continued to strengthen our relationship between Malaysia and also United States is in the area of education. Cultural exchanges is very important and have been pillars of Malaysia and the American relations. I was fortunate enough to be selected for the International Visitors Leadership Program, and I joined the Edward Murrow program for journalists. Had an amazing time, great experience, and I learned so much to sharpen my skills as a journalist as well. So how do you envision expanding this kind of exchanges to foster greater collaboration and mutual understanding between both societies?
It's a great question, and also I'm very, very pleased to hear you had such a good experience. We view these kinds of exchanges as something that is really, really good for the United States, but we also hope very good for the people who go on them, and it sounds like in your case it was.
It was amazing. It's beyond amazing, yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
But I think that this is something where we want to promote that. We want more people to be doing exchanges in both directions. Yeah. And one thing that I'm very committed to is the importance of getting more Americans to come to Malaysia, be it to visit as tourists, be it to come for business, but also to study and to learn. And I think that we have a long history of that. I just ran into someone who was telling me about their own experience. Actually, it's the president of the Senate, of your Senate, telling about his own experience with Peace Corps volunteers in Sarawak in the 1960s. And I was really, really moved to hear the impact that these individuals who were young, who were coming to a place that was even more foreign and more different from their own than it would be now. I mean, even today, the differences between Malaysia and the United States are great, but it's nothing compared to what it was like in the 1960s. And the fact that these young Americans came here and had such an impact on the Malaysians they worked with is really inspiring. But what's also extraordinary, and I think the reason I'm such a believer in these programs, is that these young Americans went back to the United States committed to a U.S. role in international relations and also committed to the U.S. Malaysia relationship. And so we want to find ways to expand that. We want to get more young Malaysians going to the U.S., but also more Americans coming here to study, to learn, and then hopefully we can restart some of these exchange programs that we had that suffered because of COVID, and we look forward to trying to work with our Malaysian partners to do that.
I have a personal friend who actually did a teacher exchange program here in the rural areas of Sabah and Sarawak, and he was just amazed, and he was just, immersing himself in the culture and being a teacher there. He said it was a priceless experience basically. And yeah, so thanks, that you would want to continue to strengthen that exchange program. Now let's talk about economic ties between Malaysia and the United States, which have flourished over the years. And now both countries has joined the 14-member Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, ITEF trade agreement, which was launched in May 2022. How can Malaysia derive tangible benefits from these trade agreements, and particularly in trade and investment and unlocking new avenues for growth?
I think that there are a couple of key points here. One is Malaysia has been extraordinarily successful at benefiting from global trade. My Malaysian friends and counterparts all make the point that Malaysia is a trading nation. I think Malaysia has prospered as a result of its engagement in international trade. And I think that one of the things that became very clear during the pandemic is that there are challenges in areas, for instance, like supply chains, which traditional trade didn't really address. And so I think that what the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework does for Malaysia is several things. One is Malaysia has a seat at the table of a grouping of countries, 14 countries, that cover 40% of global GDP, that cover, include the largest country in the world, India, the most populous, as well as the largest developed country, the United States, but also include Japan, Korea, as well as Australia, New Zealand, and countries in the region, and not just the countries that took part in the CPTPP, Malaysia, Vietnam, Brunei, and Singapore, but also Indonesia, Thailand, and the Philippines. Countries whose markets are extraordinarily important and we're going to grow. And I think that having a seat at the table, helping shape the outcomes, reflects Malaysia's longstanding engagement on trade, its longstanding engagement on helping set the norms that govern international trade. And I think that it sends a signal to investors that Malaysia wants to be part of setting the highest possible standards. And I think that you can see the impact of that by the additional flows of investment from certainly American companies into Malaysia since IPEF was announced. And I would just note that in 2022, so the year IPEF was announced, there was very significant U.S. FDI flows. And that's information that it shows what's actually been invested as compared to what's been announced. The U.S. Net FDI flow into Malaysia was 43% of the total, which was greater than the next 6 countries combined. And I think that shows, like, this is money that's actually that's been invested. And so we'll look to see what happened in 2023. The Department of Statistics in Malaysia hasn't announced it yet. But I think we're very confident. American companies continue to invest in Malaysia because they see the opportunities. They see the strengths of Malaysia's market, but also Malaysia's integration to global markets and the Malaysian workforce. And we're very proud that the U.S. investment in Malaysia has created over 300,000 jobs, that the monthly salary at U.S. companies in Malaysia is 6,500 ringgit a month, twice the average for Malaysia. And I think this reflects the fact that U.S. investment isn't important for its just volume. It's also important for its quality. American companies have extraordinary records training their Malaysian staff. And I think that one thing that makes me as an American very proud is that when I go to Malaysian business events is to see how many leaders of Malaysian companies and founders of Malaysian companies worked at an American company or have a background in the U.S. And I think that reflects the investment American companies have made in training their Malaysian staff.
My husband works in Cargill, or was working in Cargill,
Okay.
a U.S MNC, by the way.
Yes, so you know. So I think that's something that's really good. The other thing is, it's worth keeping in mind, U.S. companies, there was a study that was done by the American Chamber of Commerce that just came out a few weeks ago. American companies paid 5.7 billion ringgit in taxes last year. And they're major contributors to research and development. A significant share of the total research and development spending in Malaysia is done by American companies. And also, the companies that are investing in Malaysia are global companies that bring tremendous skill. Over 70% of the new U.S. investments are from Fortune 500 companies. And I think that it reflects their appreciation for what Malaysia has to offer. So we're very proud of that. Now, at the same time, there's more that we can do. And I think that we look forward to working with our friends in the Malaysian government to try and make sure that we're doing everything possible to encourage the greatest amount of trade and the strongest possible economic relationship.
Fantastic. Let's shift gears and talk about the challenges, security challenges, and also particularly in counterterrorism threats and also maritime security. How can Malaysia and United States enhance their cooperation to address these evolving threats?
So one thing I'm very proud of is that over the years, I think we have worked very closely together. And when I was here before, from 2014 to 2017, I think that we significantly expanded counterterrorism cooperation. And I think that there was a recognition on the part of the Malaysian government, but also the U.S. government, of the fact that this is an area where no one country can be effective on its own. We need international partnership, we need cooperation, and I think the work that we have done with our Malaysian counterparts, the work that Malaysia has done on its own, but also with others in the region, and then bringing to bear our own experiences, has been incredibly powerful and extremely effective. So I think that we need to share more information. We need to work more closely together. I think that we need to get Americans and Malaysians to consider it to be a sort of normal reflex to pick up the phone, to talk to each other when they have information about threats. But I think that counterterrorism is only one area. I think that there's also very significant developments in the areas having to do with maritime security and the ability to protect sovereignty, which we think are important for countries throughout the region. I think it's no secret. The world is much more unsettled now than it was a decade ago. And in order to deal with those threats, I think there needs to be more international cooperation. I think for the United States, we have prioritized working with our allies and partners in the Indo-Pacific. And I think you've seen tremendous strengthening of our relationships with the Quad, also with Japan, with Korea, strengthening of a trilateral relationship between the U.S., Japan, and Korea, strengthening of our alliance with the Philippines, also with Thailand, strengthening of our partnership with Vietnam, with Indonesia. And I think there's more that we can do with Malaysia, and obviously tremendous cooperation with Singapore. I think all those things reflect the fact that countries in the region are concerned about global trends. They are concerned about the need to work to protect their own sovereignty, and the United States sees ourselves as an important partner in doing that. And I think that we're very proud of how closely we have worked with our Malaysian counterparts over the decades. I mean, it's been 67 years since Malaysia's independence, or Malaysia will celebrate 67 years. The U.S. has been here at every step of the way, and we're very proud of how closely we work with our Malaysian friends and counterparts.
Ambassador, speaking about security concerns, I would like to ask you a question that is probably weighing in a lot of people's mind, that is about the Gaza situation and the push for ceasefire. What is your response to the criticism that the United States government isn't doing enough to bring about peace to the Israeli and Palestinian people? Your thoughts?
Look, my response is that, I understand the criticism. I don't agree with it completely, because the U.S. has worked on this. I personally served in Israel from 1997 to 2000. I worked on peace process negotiations at that time, including the effort that led to the Camp David talks. In fact, I was extended. I had to stay longer through the end of the Camp David discussions, and I know how close we came. And one of the reasons that we weren't able to fully reach an agreement was because because of the tremendous pressure that Hamas and its attacks created and just disrupted the possibilities of a two-state solution. At the same time, I think that we recognize that no one cares about the past. Ultimately what people want to know is, what are we doing now? And what we're doing now is working very, very hard with our partners, the Egyptians and the Qataris, to try and bring about a meaningful and sustained ceasefire. Obviously, I think that it's important to recognize this is not something that's only going to be done by one side. There needs to be actions on both sides, and I think that we are working with our partners to try and make sure that that gets done. And ultimately, there needs to be a release of hostages. There needs to be a variety of actions that need to be taken by both sides to bring about a sustained ceasefire. At the same time, that's only part of it. We also are very conscious and very concerned about the humanitarian tragedy that is happening in Gaza, and we're working very hard with partners to try and bring about a surge of humanitarian assistance, including by building a facility that will allow the unloading of greater amounts of humanitarian aid. We're participating in airdrops, and I think that you've seen that the U.S. is trying to show diplomatic leadership. Our Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, was in the region last week. And I think that his efforts, as well as efforts from the president and others, continue to reflect the fact that we believe that what countries are looking for from the United States is not just words. They're looking for deeds. They're looking for the U.S. to play the role that historically we've played to bring about a meaningful ceasefire, the flow of assistance, but also a resumption of negotiations that genuinely lead to a two-state solution.
Ambassador, in closing, I would like to ask you, as we navigate the complexities of the 21st century, what message would you like to convey to Malaysians on behalf of the government of the United States in regards to deepening our partnership and also friendship?
I think the first is the U.S. very much respects Malaysia's successes and Malaysia's success as a multiracial, multi-ethnic society. That's something that as Americans, that rings very true to us. We also recognize that Malaysia has been a tremendous success story for democracy in recent years. And we very much appreciate the leadership that the government and the Prime Minister have played in that, but also that Malaysians across the spectrum have played, and the strength and resilience of Malaysian institutions dealing with tremendous change. I think that our message is that there is so much more we can do. That at every level, our societies are stronger when we are able to work together, that ranging from dealing with the climate crisis, preserving peace and stability in the region, expanding prosperity in our own countries, but also across the region, and that the best relationships are those where, regardless of whether or not we agree or disagree, we speak frankly to each other and we look for what we can do rather than dwelling on areas of disagreement. And I'm very positive. I mean, I think that there is tremendous potential, and we also very much respect Malaysia's status as a majority Muslim country that is providing leadership in the global arena, that is helping show that Islam is a force for good and has the ability to be a force for good. And we think that this is something that the U.S. benefits from, and we look for more ways in which we can partner together to try and promote our fundamental values.
Ambassador, we do have a little bit of time, and I would like to touch about the South China Sea. What are your thoughts about this thorny issue, and how are we going to move forward from this?
So, look, our view is that the key thing in the South China Sea is countries need to abide by international law. There has been a ruling by the tribunal with regards to some of the most challenging issues. We think that the kind of bullying that we're seeing around Second Thomas Shoal is not just counterproductive, but is actually deeply dangerous. The U.S. has made very clear that we stand by our alliance commitments and obligations, and we believe that the solution is to avoid unilateral actions, to avoid bullying and threats, but instead to try and abide by the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, to try and show respect, and above all, to seek for common ground and ways in which countries countries can reach agreement on a code of conduct, which, as you know, ASEAN countries have been working on for many years, as well as genuinely abide by the Declaration of Conduct.
Ambassador, in 1 minute, Malaysia becomes the ASEAN chairperson for 2025. So how can we position ourselves better for this?
I think that there's a couple of things. I think one is that Malaysia needs to continue its long-standing tradition of working closely with partners. Ultimately, whatever countries ASEAN share depends to a great deal on its ability to work closely with other members of ASEAN, as well as with ASEAN's dialogue partners, which include the United States and, of course, many others. I think that the other is that I think Malaysia should be looking for ways in which to expand the economic connectivity between ASEAN countries, as well as ways in which that economic connectivity can be used to deal with the climate crisis. But I think that Malaysia historically has been a very effective ASEAN chair. I visited in 2006 when Malaysia was chair, and I was here in 2015 when Malaysia's chair. We have tremendous respect for the skill and professionalism of our Malaysian counterparts, and I think that we look forward to working closely with Malaysia to ensure that it has a very successful year as ASEAN chair.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you for sharing your perspectives on the show. Once again, congratulations and a heartfelt wishes to you as you begin the new exciting diplomatic journey here in Malaysia.
Thank you so much, Melissa. And, I can only tell you again how grateful I am, how grateful my family is to be here. Again, we had such a wonderful time here, and I think that, since we've been back, we've been really grateful at how welcoming people have been. And it's just great to be in a place that for us is both vibrant, exciting, but also just a lot of fun.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Well, that's been The Nation on Bernama TV. Stay tuned for many more insightful discussions. I'm Melissa Ong, signing off. Bye now.